And now we are back to our co-hosts and second guests for the evening, Bob Rapfogel and Sofia Pineda Ochoa. And they are the founders of the nonprofit organization Meet Your Future, and they're going to talk to us about their great new website. I've taken a peek at it. It is really slick looking, really professional and nice, and also it has very good, solid scientific information on it for vegans and non-vegans to learn a lot about nutrition, the environment, and animal rights. So, Bob and Sofia, tell us about Meet Your Future and what led you to start this project.
Sofia's been working, I guess, for a couple of years on compiling some research and sort of what I'd call a concise yet broad and topic kind of treatise on the issues surrounding consumption of animals, on human health, on the environment, and on ethics. And when we met, we kind of have gone through a number of ideas and iterations on how to compile and organize and put that information out there. And what we eventually landed on through a number of iterations and ideas was to do video chapters. We feel that's an accessible way to broadly get the information out there. And the form that it's taken, and the website's still a work in process, but what we kind of want it to be so that we can iteratively add the information as we do it. And the way we've kind of organized it is those three main topics: health, environment, and ethics, and individual chapters within each of those. And as we complete those chapters, we post them. And the chapters essentially consist of a video presentation that you can watch on YouTube, on our website. As we get things rolling, it's a pretty brand new structure that we've put out there with the website, but it will eventually link into social media as well. And so people can watch a video on just the links between animal protein and cancer, for example. Or they can, as we get these chapters populated as they're completed, they can skip ahead to some of the ethics matters or the environmental matters. And I have no doubt what we have currently out there will change as we work through the chapters and we add ideas or revise ideas. But that's essentially what we've been working on. And so the genesis of it was Sofia's legwork and hard research, and then from there, kind of the two of us working together to organize, refine, and put it into these video chapters that we're going to release as we complete them.
We think it's a lot of relevant information that unfortunately people are not very aware of. It's just very important information that doesn't bubble to the surface like it should.
Yeah.
Starting from the impact it has on their health, the impact it has on the environment, it affects them directly and indirectly through the meat industry and all of the waste that they produce and climate change and all of the environmental aspects. And so we just wanted to make it more accessible to people.
Yeah, and there's some thought in terms of the order in which we're doing it. We're starting with the health topics, not so much because we think it's the most important. I mean, as Bob Linden was mentioning, he just got lucky and turns out going vegan was healthy. But when we've kind of gone down our separate paths of becoming vegan, and I've found when you talk to people about this, if they're coming from a place where they really haven't thought through, this isn't necessary for my health, in fact it may be detrimental, they haven't thought about any of those issues. So when you talk to them about the ethics, you talk to them even about the environmental issues, they're coming from a place where they haven't really put into context the idea that it's not necessary. So you think about the ethical issues, I think, very differently if there's no conflict between your health and the treatment and abuse of animals.
I think a lot of people...
Go ahead, please.
I think people in general have a very strong survival instinct. So no matter how much relevant information you put out there about the ethics, about the environment, if they think going vegan is going to hurt my health, they'll still, or many of them will still refrain from doing this change in diet when in fact it does quite the opposite.
It seems like health is a good stepping stone for people to become vegans. On the other hand, it also kind of has the highest recidivist rate,
right,
that the so-called health-only vegans or vegetarians, without they're considering the ethical issues and the environmental issues, they'll tend to think, well, maybe I'll go back,
Definitely.
Right.
And that's why we didn't want to just talk about health. That's why it's a combination about the ethical problems, the animal rights, and the environmental as well.
Yeah.
Because of what you're saying, exactly.
On the health topic, I was very impressed with the quality of the information. You're going straight to the source, and normally most people can only see the information, let's say, in a newspaper or magazine article that refers to scientific articles, and you're just showing us the article and bringing the information out. I mean, you're talking about the article indirectly in a way, but at the same time we can see, okay, this is the article that has this important information.
Right, and we're very fortunate that Sofia's a physician, has the background to do that type of research, and whether we're talking about the health or when we get to the environmental chapters, we want to stay true to a fact-based presentation of objective information. Some of it, there's a challenge sometimes of it can get a little bit dry going from one research paper to another, and we'll spend some time later going back and maybe making it a little punchier, a little easier to digest, but it is
also we want it to be a resource.
Yes, absolutely.
A resource of information for activists or for people, an educational resource. That was the objective of it.
I'll certainly be looking at it regularly. So one of the big questions is about plant-based diets, which everyone always asks. I hardly even have to mention it, but it's where do you get your protein? And I know that you want to cover that topic in detail, right?
Definitely. Actually, that fear is pretty misplaced. In fact, that's the reason why people are driven to consume animal products. The concept that we think that protein comes exclusively from animal products. However, protein is abundant in vegetable, talking about the presentation which I'm going to give in Spanish, and vegetable-based sources, plant-based diets,
yes.
Plant-based diets as well. It's available in fruits,
beans,
in vegetables, in beans,
legumes,
in nuts, in grains. Actually, you can see in the first video when we point out, we have a USDA table where we compare the protein content in broccoli and in beef. And actually, per calorie, we can see that broccoli even has more protein per calorie than beef.
About 15% more. I was going to say, I mean, it's really interesting that that's still such a common misperception. I mean, it's not just that plants have protein; it's that protein deficiencies are just not an issue. If you're eating enough of anything, animals or plants, you're getting enough protein. So we kind of try to walk through not just that there's protein in plants and it's better quality as we get through some of the other chapters, but just that there's no fear in going to a plant-based diet. There's right. Study after study after study, and also absence of any studies that have shown that there's any sort of protein deficiency that anybody would be at risk of. As long as you're eating enough of stuff, you get enough protein.
Yeah. The body does not care for our metabolism if it gets amino acids from a vegetable source or from an animal source, because it's the same amino acid. And then there are the essential amino acids, which many people think that are only contained in animal products, but the fact is that with very few exceptions, like gelatin, for example, gelatin, which is actually an animal protein, most protein from both animal and plant sources are complete protein, so they contain the 9 amino acids, essential amino acids that we need.
The science is getting better and better, at least from a vegan's perspective, but the mainstream media still has to catch up a bit on that, don't you think?
Absolutely. It's amazing how much there's still, I guess, there's money behind a lot of it, and industry interest, and promoting
and just tradition,
sales and tradition.
Tradition. Without a basis, without like a scientific basis. I see it even amongst physicians. I'm a physician. The physicians who I work with even have these concerns.
They'll ask you where you get your protein.
They will. And
so you're also dealing with environmental issues. What kind of topics will you be covering on your website?
Well, we're covering water use, because I don't know the exact numbers that he was quoting, but for 1 kilo of beef, you use almost 4,000 gallons of water. So that's pretty wasteful. We cover water, we cover manure. The problems with manure, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but here in the United States, we produce per second 87,000 pounds of manure. And so it gets back to our water, and it causes a lot of contamination problems.
Like the big dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico.
Right.
And
That, and just water contamination, nitrates, hormones, antibiotics that come back to us in the water eventually. We're covering land use because, the livestock use of land is very extensive. Actually, 30% of the land, which is not covered by glaciers, is used for the livestock industry. And it causes a lot of deforestation in the Amazon. About 70% of it has already been leveled for this purpose.
And it's not just for where the livestock go. People, again, it seems obvious, but they don't always think through or are aware. But it's the feed crops will level a lot of rainforest and other lands that are used to grow food for animals for people to consume, while there's a large portion of the population of the human population that's going hungry.
Definitely. We're covering as well overfishing. 75%, according to the United Nations, of the fisheries are already overexploited. And according to some scientists in Canada, by 2048, if our fishing levels continue at the same level, which we are being fished right now, and I don't see them going down, by 2048, the fisheries are going to be practically exhausted. So we're covering overfishing. There's a United Nations report that says that livestock contributes to greenhouse gases more than all of transport together, more than cars, trains, automobiles, everything. Oh, the relationship between our growing population, we also cover that in our environmental. Our human population has reached the first billion in population in this earth. It took 150,000 years for us to reach the first billion. We have a human population that is increasing exponentially. We reached our first billion of humans in this earth in the beginning of the 1800s. And now, 2015, we're over 7 billion, projected to be a little less than 10 billion by 2050 and more than 12 billion by the end of this century. So feeding humans through animals is a very inefficient way of doing it, and we're going to be covering that as well.
And also, you will be talking about the ethical implications of animal use, right?
That's right. We're still kind of working through how we're going to separate individual chapters on that, but we want to start, I believe, with the basic framework of thinking about this ethically, which I think was, it's been put by a number of people in different ways, but it's about not causing unnecessary harm on a sentient being who can experience suffering. That's where I think some of the chapters we're working on ahead of time kind of play into hopefully educating some of our non-vegan audience that will be going through these chapters, we hope, to understand what unnecessary means when they think about the health issues and the environmental issues, and putting that in context, and then really thinking about, okay, what is involved in the use of animals for consumption, primarily for food, but certainly for other uses as well that our society exploits animals with. And so we'll be kind of parsing out a number of topics as well under the ethics. We'll kind of the recent phenomenon of marketing humane, free-range, grass-fed, organic, what have you, animal foods, and talk about that specifically, as well as a number of other topics. But we're still kind of working on how to organize. I think we've got a list on the website of our current thoughts of what we'll be doing in what order, but certainly starting with kind of the basic premise of thinking about the ethical implications of what do we all sort of agree on as a society. Hopefully it's something along the lines of not causing unnecessary harm and suffering, and thinking about how that applies given what we're looking at. And it's probably the core of how most of us, if we're vegan, at some point got to where we are, even if we started with the health issues.
I think a lot of people have an abstract idea that animals suffer at some point in their life, but they don't really have an accurate reflection of what actually happens to the animals. It doesn't really match reality.
I'm sure you've heard many times people just don't want to bring it up, right? They know about it kind of in the back of their heads, but they really don't want it to be spoken in front of them,
And sometimes they don't even know, Even myself, I went to a slaughterhouse 3 years ago, and I could not believe what I saw. Probably I'm not going to get into the details. Do we have to go? We're okay. Okay. I went to a slaughterhouse, and I was so surprised because I thought that animals had a painless slaughter, that they had an automatic death, that when they had a pistol shoot them in the head, that they would die instantly and they would be unconscious through the slaughter process. And it was not what was happening. And first of all, these animals are fearing for their life. They're very nervous. It's very hard for them to be injured strategically. And then also, a lesion in their head does not mean that they're going to have an instant death. Remember Gabrielle Giffords, the Democrat representative who had a shot in the head? She was actually treated here in Houston in our medical center. She recovered beautifully. She did not have an instant death. And so that was, some of the things.
Another horrible myth is the myth of the one bad day theory that, okay, they're slaughtered on this one day, but they had a happy life before that.
But they were branded with hot metals. They were transported one on top of the other in extreme climates with no water, with no food. They probably had fractures in the transportation. They have to be prodded with electricity, with electric things, and with pain just to motivate them to walk from the truck to the place where they're gonna process them. And
just living in these
confined facilities,
so tightly packed together.
Definitely. Well,
they're covered in their own waste.
In their own manure. The pigs, they castrate them with no anesthetics. They chop off their tail as if it was made out of paper or carton. They just chop it off with scissors.
Cut their teeth out.
They cut their teeth out.
It's terrible.
And like they were saying, they separate the cows from their mothers, which causes the mother a lot of distress over and over during their lifetime. And then the chicks, because the male chicks are worthless to the industry, so they grind them alive, and that's a legal and standard procedure to grind the male chicks alive.
Yeah, they don't grow in the egg industry. They don't grow fast enough to be of economic value for the chicken poultry meat industry, so they are a byproduct that are disposed of in industries, quote-unquote industry standard ways that are just horrific.
Even the female chicks, I don't even know who has it worse. The male chicks, who they grind alive or they suffocate alive once they're born, as soon as they're born, or the life of misery that the female chicks have to endure to become our food.
We have another minute or so, but I just wanted to say that a lot of this ties back and for the environment and ethics to being compassionate towards other beings. And some people might think it's either or kind of situation, but I think in being compassionate towards other animals, that it makes you more compassionate towards other humans too. And generally across the earth, I just think we all need to do what we can to increase compassion throughout the population,
Definitely.
Absolutely.
We need that shift in our culture as soon as possible, and that's why we're doing this website.
Well, thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
And this has been Vegan World Radio. Thank you.